Hey people, it's Niyas713. Now this is an article from NPR. Rebels are closing in on Ethiopia's capital. Its collapse could bring regional chaos. A year after civil war erupted between the Ethiopian government and its Eritrean and ethnic militia allies on one side and soldiers heading from the northern region of Tigray on the other, a once unlikely scenario looks like a real possibility. The rebels could topple the government. This past week, Ethiopia declared a state of emergency amid fears that soldiers from the armed wing of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF, would march through the streets of the capital, Addis Ababa. The federal armed forces have appealed to retired soldiers and veterans to rejoin the military, and they have asked residents of Addis Ababa to rejoin the war effort with whatever weapons they have. The TPLF, supported by the Oromo Liberation Front (OLA), a rebel group from Ethiopia's Oromia region, are a bit more than 200 miles from the capital, but it could still take days or weeks of fighting across mountainous and hostile terrain for them to close the distance. The latest reports from inside the country suggest Saturday the U.S. State Department ordered non-emergency U.S. government employees and their family members to leave Ethiopia. The White House has declared the situation in Ethiopia an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States, and the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, arrived in Addis Ababa on Thursday to push for ceasefire talks. Neighboring Kenya issued a plea to end what it calls a nationwide social convulsion. China and Russia, who had been reluctant to weigh in on the conflict, joined the UN Security Council statement calling for an end to hostilities. On Friday, the TPLF and OLA signed an alliance with 7 other rebel groups. Definitely, we will have a change in Ethiopia before Ethiopia employs, Burhan Ghebrekhristos, a former foreign minister and Tigray official, told reporters at a signing ceremony in Washington, D.C. For Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, it has been a sharp turn of events. He has gone from freshly minted Nobel Prize laureate to international outcast in less than 2 years. Abiy now faces grim prospects: continue a war that could easily spill into the densely populated capital, a defeat at the hands of a renegade army, or a negotiated settlement that would severely weaken his position. Before the Prime Minister came to power in 2018, the TPLF ruled Ethiopia for more than a quarter century and waged 2 intensely bloody wars, a 15-year conflict that toppled the communist military dictatorship and saw the country's Eritrean region win independence, and years later a much shorter but brutal border conflict with the newly formed country. One of Abiy's first moves was to extend an olive branch to his Eritrean counterpart, President Isaias Afwerki, overture that led to the Ethiopian leader receiving the Peace Prize in 2019. But there remains a lot of bad blood between Eritrea and the Tigrayans, says Michel Gavin, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He says there's a lot of historical grievance coming from the Eritrean elite and aimed very specifically at the TPLF from that era, adding that Eritreans still nurse a sense of betrayal over the years of violence. The humanitarian situation is growing worse by the day. A report released Wednesday by Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission blamed all sides in the year-long conflict for atrocities including extrajudicial executions, torture, rape, and attack on refugees. While the UN did not come to a conclusion whether genocide was committed, an internal U.S. report concluded that last November forces allied with Ethiopia's government deliberately and efficiently rendered Western Tigray ethnically homogeneous through the organized use of force and intimidation. While all factions have committed violence against civilians, Cameron Hudson, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, says the most egregious human rights abuses in Tigray have been carried out by Eritrean soldiers. They have tried to eliminate the Tigrayans, he says, and there's no telling what the Tigrayans might be interested in doing if they're able to seize the upper hand against the Ethiopian government. Amnesty International says Eritrean soldiers slaughtered hundreds of unarmed civilians in the northern Tigrayan city of Axum, opening fire in the streets and conducting house-to-house raids in a massacre that may amount to a crime against humanity. NPR has independently verified reports of sexual violence in Tigray, speaking witnesses and victims, including one woman in the rebel capital of Mekelle, who was held captive for about a month by government forces. The woman told NPR that she was chained up for 9 days and gang raped by Eritrean soldiers. Ethiopia's government declared a ceasefire this summer, putting its troops out of Tigray. But fighting continued, and the government has deployed strategic choke points to maintain a de facto blockade on the wayward region that has been nothing short of devastating for civilians, according to Refugees International. that has made it nearly impossible for aid trucks to enter and relief flights to land. Alex DeWall, the executive director of the World Peace Foundation at Tufts University, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, tells NPR. That is a piece of what makes it so very difficult to get humanitarian material into Tigray. The UN calls for access to the region in July, warning that some 400,000 people there had crossed the threshold into famine, with 1.8 million more on the brink. The same month, the UN Refugee Agency said the full-scale humanitarian crisis had been unfolding in Tigray since the start of the conflict, with more than 46,000 people fleeing to neighboring Sudan and an additional 1.7 million internally displaced. If Addis Ababa falls to the rebels, Ethiopia could collapse, triggering regional chaos. There's a tremendous amount of anger in many parts of Ethiopia over the legacy of the TPLF's long and repressive rule that is unquestionably going to lead to resistance, the CFR Gavin says. Ethiopia's regional states are largely divided along ethnic lines and have their own militia groups. Hudson of the Atlantic Council says they have feuds, they have grudges against their neighbors, and are against the central authority, says. So I think the question is, what becomes unleashed by the fall of the government? Amnesty International on Thursday offered a sobering assessment, noting in a statement sent to NPR that there had been an alarming rise in social media posts advocating ethnic violence in the country in recent days. More broadly, an internal collapse of Ethiopia could have repercussions for the whole of East and Northeast Africa. Eritrea's leaders view the rise of the Tigrayans as an existential threat, Hudson says. Kenya is worried about an influx of refugees and a humanitarian crisis on its doorstep, a problem with which Sudan is already too familiar. You're talking about millions of refugees flooding a very unstable region. You're talking about humanitarian catastrophe, Hudson says. The disruption that causes, not just to Ethiopia and neighboring states, but well beyond, is cataclysmic. It could make the US fight against terrorism much more difficult. For Washington, the biggest concern is Somalia and the potential for that nation to be used as a platform for international terrorism. Ethiopia has long helped keep a lid on the Islamist al-Shabaab militia and offered crucial backing for the fragile government of Somalia, which seems to be ever on the verge of anarchy. Ethiopian forces are a powerful anchor in Somalia, writes Vanda Philbert-Brown, senior fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. Their military heft significantly surpasses that of the Somali National Army or Somali National Police, SPN, which he says have little independent capacity even for defensive operations against al-Shabaab. A failed state in Ethiopia would likely make things much worse there, the CFR's Gavin says. Instability in Ethiopia is absolutely a boon to terrorist organizations in East Africa writ large. The Atlantic Council's Hudson agrees that such environments are a breeding ground for extremism. I think you create a scenario where this part of the world is exporting instability well beyond it. It becomes a magnet for malign actors seeking a home base. Well, anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this story. Well, enjoy is probably the wrong word. I hope you found it interesting. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'll leave this and several other articles in the description to give you a better grasp of the situation. If you'd like to support this channel, I'll leave my Cash App. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave it there as well. If you'd like to buy one of my t-shirts, I'll leave that there as well. Peace.